All right, welcome to Comfortably Uncomfortable. You've got Sandy and Alex here, and we are here to empower women to choose courage over comfort by getting comfortably uncomfortable. We get real and cut through the bullshit. Are you ready to get a little weird? Because we're going to laugh, sweat, cry, and grow together.
No topic is going to be TMI. Well, maybe for me, but not for Sandy. We complement each other in that way. Okay, so are we ready?
Well, yeah, duh, I am, but are you?
Okay, let's go.
The one with the orgasms.
Oh,
Alex.
we go.
I mean, we talked about wanting to bring this subject up for many reasons. And I know that we are going to talk about a lot of different things, but I'm just going to go straight to the comfortably uncomfortable question.
Oh my God, my heart is
that
racing.
You wanted me to ask you off camera, not recorded, but I said no because we are going to be genuine here.
No idea what she's about to ask me, people.
Well, Alex, have you faked an orgasm?
Oh.
Have you?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, you hesitated, like you had to think about that.
No, my answer was not because I was hesitating. It's because I think it took me a long time to really understand what an orgasm was. Like, I think it's like looking back on it. Oh, I totally did because I didn't actually know what was supposed to be happening.
Sure. Yeah. And so
Right?
a lot
Does
of stuff we're going to talk about. Oh, yeah. A lot of stuff we're going to talk about actually comes from a book that I recommended Alex called Come As You Are by, I always mess up her name. So Alex, you say it.
Emily Nagoski.
Nagoski. I'm like, Nagoski. And so if you haven't read it and you want to get more, read it. But it's a great thing you bring up because she brings that up in her book about like women not knowing if it's an orgasm or not because you know we don't ejaculate semen, right? There's no sperm that needs to get out of us to create life,
right?
Okay, so how did you like come to know? Like, how did you figure that out?
You know what? Actually, I'm not sure if I totally know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I mean, it certainly I think has to do with my partner. Right? With my husband, like I definitely recall that being like I can recall that with him versus other people better. I mean, hopefully, right?
Okay. I mean, so yes, you're not faking all your orgasms. You now know when you have an orgasm or not. But this whole idea of orgasm,
of you know when and how.
Well, do you think orgasms are overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
You think orgasms are underrated?
I think they're amazing.
Interesting. I think they're overrated. So like I find the word orgasm and people needing to have sex to have orgasm is overrated.
Okay. Sure. But and you know I actually think it's a really interesting point from the book that less than half of women even orgasm during intercourse. So that part I will completely agree with you. Like, you know, sex equals orgasm. That's overrated.
Right.
That's like,
I just think that's overrated.
Right?
Okay.
That's not a real thing for most people.
Yeah, I mean, granted, orgasms, yes, I'm with you. They're fantastic and they feel great. But I just think like whenever we think about sex or whenever we think about female pleasure, and we're going to get more into this of just like this idea of like women need to orgasm for it to feel good or for it to be purposeful or meaningful or whatever. And I think that, for it to count. I think that's overrated. Now, I think it's underrated about female pleasure. I think we underrate the ability to create pleasure for women, you know, sexually, emotionally, all of the above.
I think we're completely on the same page. We just answered it differently because because I think that it's underrated in the fact that it's not talked about.
Yeah.
Again, I'm such a broken record, but add it to the list of things that like we're not allowed to say or talk about or share. And it's just something that should be talked about more because you can find out what's quote unquote like normal or what you thought was normal really it's any way that you experience pleasure or orgasm is normal, right?
Right.
As
That's why
long
I
as
love the
it's on
book.
your own terms.
Yes,
This
that's why I
book's
loved the book.
amazing. Everyone,
Oh, it's
please,
so good.
please, please listen, read,
Um,
whatever.
yeah, I mean, for me, like honestly, like I came from a very Catholic Christian household where like
Mm-hmm.
sex was to procreate, to create life, and we
Yeah.
practice abstinence, and that's
Mm-hmm.
how far we're going to go. And
Mm-hmm.
it's funny just coming from a very scientific family too. My dad's a
Right.
physician. My mom went back to school to become a nurse. So it's interesting the dichotomy of sex in a social context and
Yeah.
sex as far as like anatomy, because one of the
Right.
things that later on growing up I kind of realized to help with my own self-discovery, and we'll get into that, but I want to make sure everyone understands this, of like anatomically, embryologically, which means that when we are developed in the womb,
Mm-hmm.
we have the same parts. Like, yes,
Right.
one develops into a penis, one develops into a vagina. I'm going to say that word again just because I can tell it makes you uncomfortable. Penis.
No, I was just waiting for
Yet,
the first time it was gonna be out
I know,
there.
poop, penis. I said it.
Yep.
Um, yet this like we forget that we have the same parts, yet it's organized differently. So, like a quick
Mm-hmm.
little anatomy lesson, like the head of the penis is the same embryologically as the clitoris of the female,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we have the scrotum and the scrotal stuff. I don't have a penis, so I just call it
Yep.
thingy and stuff. That becomes pretty much like our labia, and
Yeah.
then like the urethra where we pee, like, yes, the pee tube goes through the head of the penis, so that's where they pee. But then we have our urethra separate from the head of the penis, which is where our urethra is, where we pee.
Mm-hmm.
So I always found it fascinating of like, when I would talk with girlfriends and talk about like orgasm during penetration sex, like I don't like, it's not like my G spot. Sometimes I would tease and be like, I don't have a G. It just skips
Uh-huh.
over that letter. And because the only way of me to quote unquote orgasm, like to have this orgasmic release, or what I thought in my head was an
Yeah.
orgasm,
Right.
was to rub my clit, like to have
Mm-hmm.
that stimulated.
Right.
But when I realized that like we have the same parts, it's like, oh yeah, like penetration is more convenient for the penis
Mm-hmm.
because their head of the penis is being rubbed against the walls of the vagina.
Mm-hmm.
What? So like my idea of what I thought an orgasm was supposed to be, I didn't
Yeah.
achieve that through like penetrative sex. And
Right.
like I had to wrap my head around the fact that like that made sense because anatomically, embryologically,
Yeah.
my head of my penis is outside of my vagina.
Mind blown.
Right?
Yes. I
So,
mean,
anyway.
just a simple fact like that can totally change your perspective on all of it. And
Yeah.
just, your confidence and ability to enjoy it or think about it in a different way. I think it's really really important.
Well, the thing that was hard is like wrapping that around. And then I think this is where it gets uncomfortable, is like then talking to your
Right.
partner
Right.
about that.
Right.
And so I know with like my ex-husband, that was something like talking sex was very interesting with my ex-husband. Like for someone who is very free and open, and what other words you guys like to
Mm-hmm.
describe me, colorful, blunt, like the topic of sex was just always so hard. And like I can acknowledge now, obviously years of therapy, of me realizing that partly was because I was sexually assaulted prior to getting married. And I had assault that was not penile penetration, but was object penetration. And so I, unfortunately, this is something actually I might get a little emotional. I've never actually
Yeah.
publicly acknowledged it. But when I was 17, I was uh, pretty sure given the drug, rape, drug,
Mm-hmm.
because I did lose consciousness, yet in therapy, realizing that might have been a survival mechanism of
Yeah.
blacking out,
Uh-huh.
because I do have flashbacks and
Okay.
triggers. And so for me, I was fingered. There's a memory of a wooden spoon being stuck up me.
Oh my god.
And that's where like this whole idea of non-concordance or context of sex is a huge driver for me to have these pleasurable experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And like I remember talking to my husband, my ex-husband, of like, hey, I'm no fingering. Like, can't do that, not
Right.
my thing,
Yeah.
don't do it. Yet
Yeah.
being able to like express and understand and be vulnerable and tell like why
Right.
was like the hardest thing, because I would always tell him I am a crock pot and I'm not a flash pan. He's a flash pan. Like when he's ready to have sex, he was ready to have sex. Like
Mm-hmm.
just go. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I would always use the cry. I was like, you gotta like put me in the pot, let me simmer, let me get hot, let me like, all these things. Yet like it was constantly like, I don't think we had I mean, we'd have to have him to explain if he thinks we had a bad sex life, but that wasn't really a driver for us to get divorced. So like, I don't think our sex life was a big thing there. But I do recognize and realize of now like being single and like even thinking about future sexual partners, or like the importance of having conversation
Right.
around intimacy and
Right.
sexuality and context is
Right.
huge.
Yeah.
So like,
Well, let me just
yeah,
say,
see, I'm already
I
jumping into
appreciate.
like, I don't want to go the emotional there. I'm like, let's keep
No,
going, move on.
no, you're trying to work through it, but I just want to say I appreciate you so much and being so vulnerable, and that's I got to be one of the hardest things you like had to say, and I appreciate you and applaud you for all the work that you've done, and still recognizing that you're deserving of all those pleasures on your
Yeah.
terms,
Well, it was
right?
interesting. I mean, like I'm gonna be spatic brain all over the place because I am a little emotional. But thank you, I appreciate that. Now you're gonna get the tears rolling. But like when we were talking about orgasms and like why I know like for me like I can't have the what I would consider an orgasm,
Mm-hmm.
or there's different kinds and all the things,
Right.
but like what I in my brain I'm like, oh, this means
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
orgasmed, is because of the fact that like through some of my therapy of regaining ownership and regaining like context to where I feel comfortable, I literally my homework was like
Mm-hmm.
masturbate, have a mirror, use it
Mm-hmm.
to like help you get comfortable with all of that. And so I
Right.
realized of like, whoa, yeah, clitoral stimulation is what was going to get me there. And even if I was having penetrative sex with my husband and
Right.
expecting to have an orgasm, what I seemed as an orgasm was never going to happen. It was going to create
Yeah.
more issues than solutions.
Right.
So
The
like that's why for
expectation.
me, yeah, yes, and so like when I started like faking an orgasm, oh my God, like I
Yeah.
totally would, because I was like, oh yeah, yeah, good. Oh,
Yeah.
me
Right.
too. And it was like,
Yeah.
I wasn't having that conversation of like, no, 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 no. I need this for me to get here if that's what we're wanting to do.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, and I think for me, I feel like I've gone through a transition with this in the past year, maybe more than ever. Like sort of leading with like boldness is, like a word that I really try to live by. And knowing that I'm trying to empower women with strength and confidence and getting more comfortable talking with clients about it because, personally, like my family, it's just not really been a topic discussed. And I mean, I feel so grateful for my husband and, things he's tried to help introduce me to, I guess. But it's it's a tough thing because until you're really comfortable and you're prepared, it it's not going to be as good. And then I mean, talk about, we'll be married 9 years in September, and that's a lot of life
yes.
stages.
And transitions
And
and changes in
yeah.
those 9 years. Like
Yeah.
you had babies, you got married, you started work, you left
Yeah.
work, like all this stuff
Yeah.
changes, which we don't think
So
of how it can change our
I know.
orgasms, but it absolutely can.
Absolutely. And it goes back, in the like you were saying about context and in the book about how like you don't realize that all these life stressors, like you carry them around with you and it can be a total inhibitor to an intimate relationship. And I think with when we talk about like what an orgasm actually is, you know, she says in the book, like the most narrow definition is a contraction of the pelvic floor,
Yep.
right? But it's really a release of sexual tension. Like everyone experiences them in different ways, and they can, even for one person, vary wildly. But you know, that is one thing that really the work that we're doing is helping women with their intimacy. And I mean, I know personally when I started doing this pelvic floor work and the core work, I mean, the exercise alone can help with your sex life, but I had amazing orgasms after that. Like way
That's
better than
awesome.
like before baby.
Oh,
And
that's
I think
awesome.
yeah. And I mean the breathing too, you know, if you're thinking about that, um it, so I, you know, I'm grateful for you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
My husband thanks you too. Um, so I mean, just like personally feeling better, but then having the confidence in your body. Because if you're ashamed of your body, if you don't like someone touching your body after what
In
you've gone
certain
through,
ways, yeah.
whether it's, you know, a traumatic experience, which I mean, childbirth can be that traumatic experience,
It
right?
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of reappreciate yourself and your body and what you're capable of, and making that mind body connection in order with yourself, to your point, like understanding yourself and your own
Mm-hmm.
pleasure before
Mm-hmm.
you can like understand it with someone else, I think.
Yeah, and I think the thing that struck me, and I've looked into other research and talking about this with clients and myself just in my own journey, was this whole idea of non-concordance. Because,
Yeah.
you know, arousal non-concordance means if you're a woman and you're having genital response, so like
Mm-hmm.
wetness, blood flow, the typical thing that you always hear in culture of like, oh yeah, have I made you wet?
Right.
It's like that doesn't mean that in your head you're necessarily turned on. And
Right.
like that was one of my biggest, you know, breaks for me, because
Yeah.
I in my head would be like, well, I'm wet, clearly I'm turned on, so I should like
Right.
this. And so like
Right.
it was hard
You
with,
go with
you
the
know,
should. You should like
I
this. You
right, the
should.
shooting on myself. But like
Yeah.
that's something that we have been programmed to
Totally.
believe that that's a thing. And it's like it could
Mm-hmm.
go the other way too. Like I remember after baby, I was dry. And
Yeah.
it could
Which
be
is
partly
totally
because
normal.
I, you know, totally breastfed for 2 years. It could be absolutely hormonally changed. You could be not even have a baby and just most of your life be a drier human, drier
Yeah.
female, of like, that just doesn't happen. But inside, up in your head, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the most pleasurable thing I've ever had.
Right.
Yet we culturally are like, oh, lube. And it's like, no, you got to figure out what works for you. Because like
Right.
if you're somebody like me who had this shift after baby where I was completely dry, like this created tension in my,
Yes.
like I said, in my marriage. And the fact that it was like, oh, well, I must not be turning you on. And I'm like, no, this is turning me on. And then
Yeah.
like also the reverse of like, he's like, oh, this is turning you on. I'm like, no, but I told you I don't like that. So don't do that. That's a traumatic trigger for me. My brakes are on and I no longer want to be touched by you. So like this whole concept of non-concordance, you know, arousal is mind-blowing, because it's like you got to know your head and know that your body down there parts aren't going to be doing what your head's doing.
Right.
And that's where we are. We're evolved humans. That can happen.
Right. And in our postpartum training, like one of the conversations I found so interesting was with listening into an interview with a sex therapist and talking about desire and arousal, and how men have desire and then pretty much immediately there's the arousal reaction, right?
Yep.
It's like very clear cut. And with women, it's the opposite. So they have to experience arousal and then desire. So to your crock
Hence
pot
why I'm a crock
analogy,
pot. Yes, see, yes.
it's the slow
Yes.
getting there.
Yes.
You know, we might have all the same parts, but our brains are definitely triggered in very different ways.
Well, and life experience. So like one thing I realized, like even before my, you know, sexual assault when I was 17, like I was in high school. People were talking about, people were doing all sorts of things. And it's funny because like my biggest break was the fact that I was raised in a household and chose to abstain. And it was one of those things where it was like, no, that's, wrong. It like had morality to me. So like that's my break. And I've worked with women who similar upbringing and then going into sex for the first time, they can enjoy it because they're like, but wait, that break is still on. And so creating trust, creating this environment to where that crock pot can stew, it could be touching other physical areas and getting that physical, arousal through stimulation. Or that's where it's like we tease and say like, you want to make a female orgasm, talk, right? Like for me, it was like, you can make me orgasm by just talking to me and sharing your feelings and making me feel safe. And then I'll be ready to jump you. But if you don't talk to me, I'm just not one, just me personally, I'm not one of those women that's like, okay, I'm ready to go, because probably of my upbringing and my trauma. And let's add all the other baggage I have. Do you want to date me? Any single people out there want to date me? I'm just kidding. But I also have female friends who like, they're like, oh no, I am totally more quote unquote male, of like, I got the desire, like first. And so again, comes to this whole idea of like, you do you, everything's normal. You just got to know like what you want, what you don't want, and then be able to talk about it. Because if you can't talk about it, they're like, you're missing out. Because orgasms are great, but then also just sex and being in the moment and feeling safe and having all of this like insecurities melt away, like that's the best part. Like that's the connection, that's the intimacy and growth with a partner.
Yeah. So I think we kind of touched on it, but the, kind of the what now, or how, how does it all kind of come together? And first and foremost, I think we both say, do yourself a favor, listen to that book, read the book.
Oh yeah.
Come As You
so
Are,
good.
Emily Nagoski. It could change your world.
She goes into really deep
yeah,
scientific research into all the things we touched on here and more. So if you want to go down that road, go down that road.
Yeah.
I think for us, like, the book hit us very differently, and things that brought up to top of mind for us, is going to hit differently for us, for you. And for me, it really is that whole idea of like brakes and accelerators. Like for me, I didn't need an accelerator. I didn't need somebody to like make things more sexual or make things more stimulating. Like lingerie is an example of an accelerator. If it makes you feel sexy and it's accelerating you towards that desire of sex, you're going to have a better orgasm. For me, it's all about the brakes. If my brakes are on, you could give me 1,000 accelerators and I'm still gonna be like, nope.
Yeah. Easing.
Never having an orgasm, never gonna enjoy it. You might as well just peace out. Like, and again, I'm being a little selfish now. I'm like, if I'm not gonna orgasm and it make me feel good, no, thank you. No, I'm good. Don't need that. So you gotta figure out like, do you have your brakes on, or do you have lack of accelerators?
Right. So and I think that's so important. And then the way she wrapped up the book, talking about removing the shoulds from your life, which we know all about. Go back to our should episode because it's less sexual but still relevant.
See, it sneaks up even in here, even in the sex. We can't get away from the shoulds, right?
Yeah. And then the confidence and joy. I love that, because that's what we try to offer our clients, and hopefully offer each other, ourselves, is ways to build our confidence and increase our joy, and finding pleasure, like being confident in your own pleasure, and finding that joy is going to help you and then help with your partner. So it's the communication, but understanding and giving yourself that time, that grace, and all those like wonderful things that we keep talking about.
Absolutely.
And finally, inviting tools to the party when.
Oh yeah. I mean, lube, like this is where like dilators, vibrators, like this is where we got to let go of the shame that we might have had upbringing and different generations, and understand that if you have the context and the intent, like why do we add judgment, right?
Right.
Our challenge this week is for you to step into your own orgasm and own pleasure and figure out how you can learn that about yourself and then talk about that with your partner or whoever needs to know.
Love it.
Thank you for showing up today. Getting awkward is always more fun with friends. Give us a review, tag us, and share us so we can continue to grow together.
Use hashtag CUPod, letter C, letter U, or tag us. You can find Sandy on Instagram at sweatandShineOn and Alex at aj.afterbabyfit on Instagram and afterbabyfit on Facebook and YouTube. We'll see you next time.